Emotional eating. We've all done it, and let's face it, we'll probably do it again. Food can make us feel good, but this pleasure seeking behavior can easily spiral out of control, especially when we're surrounded by highly palatable foods everywhere we turn. These cycles can feel impossible to break. That's why I'm excited to welcome back a dear friend to the podcast for his third appearance, maybe fourth, even, I think. Matty Lansdown, a scientist, nutritionist, emotional and binge eating coach, and host of the wildly popular podcast, How to Not Get Sick and Die. After spending years in disease research, Matty grew frustrated with the endless cycle of medications covering up symptoms while patients stayed stuck, unable to truly heal. He discovered that Western medicine often misses the mark by ignoring the root causes of illness, in particular, how mindset and psychology shape our physical health and eating behaviors. Having been on his own personal development journey, Matty is now super passionate about showing people how to level up their health so that healthy habits and the best food choices are easy and natural, not through force or willpower, but through transformation. Matty's passion lies in empowering women to escape the cycles of yo-yo dieting, self-sabotage, and emotional eating. He dives deeper than diet fads, uncovering the psychological and trauma-related factors behind food choices and exploring how things like dopamine imbalances, stress, sleep, and hormones all play a role. So I am really excited. And he's also a good friend of mine. He's not only been here numerous times, I think this is your fourth actually, but because one of them was a two-parter. So this is the fourth episode with you on it, Matty. Anyways, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Hey Karen, how are you?
I'm really good. And I'm just really happy to see you because it's been a very long time since you and I got to actually sit down and have a chat with each other.
I know I've missed you. And yeah, not only have we done a few podcasts together, but once upon a time we used to be on a weekly call with a group
Yeah.
of amazing friends that we have, and that's no longer a thing. So I don't see you that often anymore.
No, and you're way over on the other side of the world in Australia. So you're one of the few people that I haven't actually met in person, which you came to Canada, just so everybody knows. He actually came to Canada, and it was the one time that I was actually not in Canada. We were literally like bypassing each other. Like I think, in Florida and you were coming to Canada. And I was like, no, because when's that going
Yeah.
to happen again?
Well, hopefully soon. Hopefully soon.
Yeah, well, so everybody knows you're about to become a father. And so I don't know, are you going to travel? What would the flight be? Like 24 hours?
Yeah, it's 17 hours from here to LA. Uh, so I guess
Yeah,
yeah,
so about that.
yeah,
I
something
think I've
like
heard
that.
it's 17 hours. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, it's a lot of
So do you
hours.
really want to bring a baby 17 hours across the world? Probably not. I'll just come see you.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, awesome. So welcome back. It's been several years since you've been on the show, so I'm really
Whoa.
excited to have you back again because I feel like things have really changed since I first had you on, which would honestly, I'm gonna have to go back and look, but I bet 4 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, it'll be something like that. Because I think
Wow.
the first episode of my show that you were on was 133, and now we're at 420.
There we go.
So it's been a while.
It's been a while. And so you love the whole psychology of eating business, which always really relates to my own. Like everybody relates to this, every single person. I mean, like I said in the beginning, who doesn't emotionally eat? I think we all do. I mean, there's the odd person that doesn't eat when they get emotional or they get stressed out. And it's like, wow, you guys are lucky that you people. But most of us, we turn to the sugary foods and we find it very hard to resist when you're feeling stressed out and, and emotional to not eat these foods. And I know that you yourself in the last couple of years had your own journey through this, which it's something that you have struggled with, but this was kind of a really intense time for you. And I really feel like came out the other side of it going, okay, now I really, really get what this is like. So if you could share that with us, that would be great.
Yeah, happy to. So I guess the reason I got into this work initially was simply just, I worked in a cancer hospital, and just whenever I would talk to anybody about their diet or lifestyle, they would automatically say something like, "Oh, Maddie, it could be better." And the thing that I learnt in that simple interaction is that they already know what better is. So,
Right.
a nutritionist or a dietitian or a coach saying you should eat kale and steak isn't news to them. Like they
No,
already know it.
so
And I've done
frustrating.
enough public speaking in different countries to know that everywhere, everybody knows that meat and vegetables and fruit and nuts and seeds are good. I've
Yeah.
never met somebody that was confused by that information, or didn't already know it from their mum or their grandma or their father or whoever. And so that was the initial realization that, oh, it must be deeper than that. If they know, why are they doing things that harm them? And that's the big thing with, I guess, people in this space is that they know what they need to do. They even know how to do it a lot of the time, but they're just not doing it and they don't really know why. And so it's
Yeah.
that why that we dive into, really. And I guess, yeah, I've struggled with it as well over the years. Initially, I guess in my early 20s, when I was just sort of a bit of a mess, and like we all are in our 20s probably,
Yes.
but just trying to figure myself out and who I am and how I want to show up in the world and doing a lot of that unconsciously. And the way that I sort of dealt with my emotions and sort of childhood traumas that were surfacing in my 20s, from living in a very violent home, which was not my father. So a lot of people assume that it's the man in the house, but it was my mum. And for whatever reason, it created a version of me. I was always happy and bubbly from the day I was born, but it meant that I didn't know as an adult how to deal with depression, sadness, any of that kind of stuff. So when it came up, when anything negative came up, or I created problems with my girlfriend at the time, or I did something stupid, in order to bypass the whole event, I would just eat copious amounts of sugar. And just, I would get pizza and lollies and candies and cookies and literally like an alcoholic gets drunk, I would get myself to the point that my blood sugar was so high that I couldn't focus on anything. I was going in and out of sleep, and I did that
Wow.
regularly, in my early 20s. But I always just put it down to the narrative that most parents give their young boys. He's just a young man. He's just a young boy that burns a lot of energy. And it's like, well, now I'm an actual nutritionist. I realize that, oh, young boys probably don't want to eat every minute of every day if you actually give them protein, right?
Yeah.
Instead of refined grains, which is the Western diet. So there's a nutritional component to it as well.
Yeah.
But I was justifying it by saying, I'm just young and I go to the gym and I've got to burn a lot of calories, and that was not the case. It was the fact that I was sort of eating my emotions or escaping any kind of negative emotional experience. And my girlfriend at the time, we had a very toxic relationship because we were young and dumb and broken, and the way that we would fix our relationship was also through eating copious amounts of food together to fix our relationship.
Wow.
So, but on the outside, both of us, 90% of the time, healthy, healthy weight, looking good, young, early 20s, mid 20s. So you would never have guessed it. But yeah, then I went on this journey of doing a lot of personal development. That relationship really showed me how I didn't want to show up in the world. I was a version of myself I wasn't proud of, and that made a lot of really bad mistakes. And so, yeah, along the journey I went of personal development, and yeah, on that journey became, I guess, this emotional and binge eating specialist that I am now. And it's because I just got so fascinated with this psychological side of behavior change. And when we know what to do, why don't we do it?
Mhm.
There's very few people that don't know how to make their life better. It's that question of like, why don't we do it? And as you said, sort of suggested at the start, even though I've done a lot of that work, it's even resurfaced for me in the last couple of years, going through some just really difficult times, post, I guess, we were locked down here in Melbourne. I left my day job to do this business and podcast stuff full time. Partnered with my ex of 9 years, leaving the country permanently forever, and the pet that we had together also after a little bit of time going
Just
as
like
well.
your
And
baby.
Yeah, it
I
was
was like a
like
child.
totally. And then yeah, just sort of yeah, ending up in my own pit of emotional eating and
Hmm.
secret eating. I
Hmm.
guess in the last couple of years because I just felt I was so lost without those parts of my life. I didn't recognize myself. I didn't understand myself. I was like, who am I without her? Who am I without those things? You know, it's been so long. 9 years is a long time. It might as well have been a divorce, you know? So that was just really hard. And so I guess I regressed into escapism through food and sugar and cookies and then now in that situation add on imposter syndrome and I'm a fraud because I teach
Yeah,
people how to
right.
do this,
Yes,
you know?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that's where
So
it gets so hard as the practitioner because I feel like I've gone through this myself with being a weight loss coach, a weight loss resistance coach, talking about hormones. I was a nutritionist, and then I was in business doing this on a regular basis. My face was out in the public constantly, and suddenly I started going into the early menopause and gained almost 20 pounds, like literally overnight. And I could just, you can go back on my videos and you see my face getting chubbier and chubbier. And I was so embarrassed. And same thing, just felt like this big fraud, like, oh my gosh, this is happening to me. And I'm like in the closet about it when I didn't want to share
yeah,
it with anybody because I was like, oh, what are people going to think? And oh, it's a
so hard.
terrible place to be when we become like we got to coach ourselves. We got to listen to, practice what we preach, basically. Ugh,
Yeah. Yeah. And people just assume, especially with social media,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
social media is the highlight reel, and people that listen to this podcast think, oh, you know,
Got
Maddie
it all
and
figured
Karen, they
out.
must be so perfect and amazing. That's why they do what they do. But we're humans too. We experience all of the emotions and the challenges and the difficulties and the triggers. And sure, a lot of the time, you know, I'm pretty good at handling them, but, you know, I'm about to find out, you know, I'm soon to be a father. So, that's going to be a huge sleep deprivation scenario, which is a perfect situation for emotional eating and choosing the wrong foods, you know. And so yeah, I think it can be misconstrued as the experts are perfect, right? But
Mhm.
anyone that's perfect at anything probably psychologically falls into the realm of psychopathic. um,
Probably.
like
Yeah.
clinically speaking, right? So
Mhm.
it's like none of us are perfect. But I think the thing that might differentiate people is the speed at which they turn things around. And really, that's what I teach people to do. It's not to never do it again. It's the speed at which you can turn things around because a lot of people will, you know, end up busy, have lunch somewhere they didn't plan to, and they're like, right, I'm done for the week or the month or the year. I'll start again when I, you know, look in the mirror and think, shit, I'm fat, aren't I? You know?
Yeah.
And so I guess the difference between that and where we want to be is I had lunch where I didn't want to. It was a fast food restaurant, let's say. The second that I get back in the car, I'm back to my regular, right? And so it's that
Yes.
speed that we want to change. It's like instead of abandoning everything until an unknown period of time, it's like, okay, this happened. That's fine. You know, don't judge yourself, accept yourself. And that all of that takes time to learn how to do as well. But you want to turn things around faster. And we don't want to be in denial. Also, we've got to make space for heavy situations and problems and things that didn't work because otherwise we just go into a cycle of beating ourselves up. And I knew that at the time as well for myself. So I was wrestling these two parts of myself of like not beating myself up for being a fraud and giving myself permission to express all of the feelings and doing what I needed to do at the time. And so it was such a mental battle going on.
Well, and don't you find that there's this like it's a fine line. It's that whole like body positivity and accepting where you're at with your body and eating what you want to eat and intuitively eating and not stressing about it because that makes it worse. But then you can go so easily on the other side of that where you're just letting anything fly and you do need some control over it, but as soon as you start putting the control, then you want to binge more. And so it's like trying to find this happy balance between control and not control, because as soon as you control, things get worse a lot of the time because that's human behavior. Like we're hardwired for pleasure, not for pain. and that gets in
Well,
the
there's this,
way.
yeah, and there's a specific thing going on right there, because we wrestle with this idea of control and the sort of over my time of doing this and understanding my own psychology, I consider myself a rebel, right? I'm someone that growing up, I spent a lot of time in trouble with my parents, a lot of time in trouble with the law at different times. And so I was very against authority. And so everybody has an inner rebel to some degree. Like some people will be on the very, very low end of the spectrum where they're just like not putting a glass on a coaster and they're like, look at me go, I'm ruining the system. And there's other people that fully go out there and break the law and ruin people's lives, right? So there's a huge spectrum of rebellion, but we've all got it in us. And a lot of people use food as their rebellion because
Mhm.
it doesn't hurt anyone. I can do it in secret. And it's cheap and easy, right? It's legal, it's fine. The only problem is that you are also the victim to that rebellion, right? So because we've grown up with parents and police officers and teachers and bosses, we're in this world of authority where we have to follow the rules or we get in trouble. And if we think about that, the way that that happens, that's like a child listening to its parent, right? I'll get in trouble if I don't follow the rules. And so what that triggers within us, and it's pretty much uniform, men, women, all of the ages, it triggers rebellion because we don't want
Mhm.
to be controlled, right? So it's this wrestle with this idea of control. It's like, I don't want to be told what to do. I'm a grown adult. And the way that people exert that freedom or like try to express it is say, I'm going to quit this diet. I'm going to eat whatever I want because I'm a grown adult and I do what I want. Don't tell me what to do. If I want the chocolate, I'm having the chocolate. I'm 35. I'm doing what I want. And the problem is again that you suffer the consequences, nobody else. So what we have to change that to instead of like control and not control is basically normal and rebellion. And what we have to consciously do is create space in our life for healthy rebellion, right? And so, because you can't suppress it away. Every time you try and suppress your inner rebel, it will come back fighting, swinging with both arms, and
Yes,
it
mine
might cause
does.
fights. Yeah, fights with your husband, fights with your wife. You'll be a shitty parent that day. You'll maybe tell your boss what you think of him or her. And so the rebellion comes out in a really problematic way. And you might actually look back on your life and think, oh my God, this toxic cycle that I've been in is my inner rebel trying to be exercised. So we actually have to find space for the inner rebel. And so the way that I find space for my inner rebel is I run a podcast called How to Not Get Sick and Die, which is my rebellion against the pharmaceutical industry, but it's done in a healthy, constructive way. And every week I race go-karts very fiercely in a league of like that I'm involved in. And it's very intense. It's extremely fast. It's dangerous, but it's an outlet for me to let out my aggression and my rebellion and my defeating of other people. And plenty of times they defeat me too. um, but the point is, there's an outlet. And I have noticed over the journey that when I don't have a healthy outlet for my rebellion, which could simply be going to the gym and working out aggressively, if that's not there, it bleeds into my life. Like the food comes back, the terrible food choices come back, the relationship problems come back because I'm trying to express a part of me that needs to be expressed.
Oh my gosh, I've never thought about it like this. Ever. Because I've always been like, I kind of felt like I was like one of a select few that really rebelled. Like I am the worst. Like if as soon as I put any restriction or rules, I am immediately like, screw this. I'm not going to do this. And I rebel. And it's
Yeah.
like I can't, it drives me crazy to have any control over myself. Like I hate that restrictions and it really bothers me. But I've never thought about the fact that maybe I just need to have this in a different area of my life so that I can be expressing rebellion because it does come from childhood. It comes from my mom and the rules and the restrictions. And and she was a freak around food, like an
Hmm.
absolute freak because she had eating disorders. And so it was like everything that was put into our mouth, it was like, if it was fat, she'd call it Vaseline. Oh, you're gonna put some more Vaseline on your toast? Like,
Mm.
and we couldn't have anything that was sugar or fat or like she was a nut bar. And that is driven so hard inside my brain is to rebel against that. And so I never have thought, oh, maybe I just need a different outlet for my rebellion. Tell me some. of your clients, have you seen what they've chosen to, like, when you tell them this, and what are some of the things that women are doing to express that side of themselves?
Yeah, so I think that the first step is actually getting those women to prioritize themselves in their family structure. So that's a challenge to begin with because they feel like the second they take space for themselves, they're neglecting the kids. They're not showing up as
Yep.
they've always shown up. So that's the first hurdle that we need to sort of get over. But I think that one of the most common outlets that people really benefit from is dance. Like being able to go to dance, like places where you can do ecstatic dance or Zumba or something like that, because for a lot of them, it makes them feel like they're teenagers again. They're partying, they're out, they're letting out their sort of inner child. And this is why, if you can understand that your rebellion comes from your childhood years, which for me it was, I was rebelling against my mother. And basically, everything I do as an adult is some form of my inner child rebelling against my mother. Therefore, the rebellion that I seek in a healthy way has to engage my inner child, right? So go-karting is a fun thing that kids do, right? And sure,
Hmm.
there's athletes that do it at a high level, but they're all doing what all of our inner childs wish we could do. Be the movie star, be the football player, they are stuck, in the best possible way doing the dreams of children, right? And so in order to be able to express that part of you correctly, it needs to, on some level, tap into what you loved as a teenager and maybe still love, or as a kid, or something that just feels like, there's no rules. I'm able to express myself however I want. And I think dance, as long as you feel comfortable dancing, is a really good way to do that. And many people simply start just dancing at home, putting their AirPods in, and expressing themselves that way. For a lot of men, it's going to be sport, and sort of
Hmm.
something with a bit
Hmm.
more aggression, as you can probably imagine, where there's a bit of sometimes body contact's important as well. I know that's important for me. Football, the possibility of injury, which happens to me all the time, is important for me to be able to feel that part of me expressed as well. But I think dance is the most common. But even some people grew up with such strict parents, even, taking a Friday night out to go and have a spa or to have a massage is a form of rebellion because they grew up with such strict parents that demonized or judged everything that they did. So
Yeah.
a lot of people will hear the word rebel and think, oh, I've got to break some rule, and it can simply be self-care is your form of rebellion because you were so suppressed as a kid. And then maybe you were in a relationship with a man that really, or a woman that really restricted your ability to express yourself. So simply the freedom to do what you want can feel like enough to actually scratch that rebellion itch.
Okay, I'm gonna have to really think about this because when you talk about this, I immediately think about my teenagehood, and I one of the things I absolutely love to do, and I've thought about this as an adult, is dance.
Yeah, there we go.
But I was always drunk
Hmm. Yeah.
when I
Yeah.
danced, always.
It
And
can take a
so I
little bit
have
of
to
time
shift
to
that. Yeah,
yeah, it
yeah.
can take a little bit of time to move the ego aside and not
Yeah,
worry about judgment.
that's what I think. Yeah, I'm like, oh my God, I feel so stupid just sitting there dancing in my living room. But I have thought about, like, what about taking dance classes? Like, I'd love to learn how to do
Yeah.
salsa dance or, like instructed dance as a means of expressing because it makes me so happy. And so I think that that could be something I could do. I just don't know if there's anything like that around my area. But anyways, I'm going to think about that one for sure. I
Yeah, it's
love
such an
it.
interesting concept.
It is. It is. I really, really appreciate that because I do feel, yeah, like I have to rebel against it. And we're just so hardwired, I think, as humans for that, like I said before, like to avoid pain and head towards pleasure. And so as soon as we're putting rules on ourselves, we associate those rules with pain.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's why I think the other side of the rebellion spectrum is normal. It should be normal and rebellion, not control and breaking the rules, right? Because as soon as we hear the word control, we think
Mhm.
deprivation, limitation. We might even go back to all the times we've felt limited in a relationship where we felt limited. Our parents made us feel limited, a boss that didn't let us, do the work we wanted to do. And so all of that just builds inside us energetically, let's say, or psychologically, that we end up expressing all of these parts from the past that never got a chance to be expressed by rebelling against your own body with a bar of chocolate in a diet that's trying to help you, right? And it's
Hmm.
like, that's why I like that the phrase, if emotional eating worked, it would have worked last time, right? Because it doesn't solve the problem, right?
No.
Because the problem in this situation is unexpressed emotion, or you could say unhealed trauma from all levels of really big trauma to really little trauma that's accumulated over your life. Those parts are seeking to be expressed. And the way that we can do it easily and cheaply and shame free, because we hide in private, is eat the chocolate, eat the cookies, whatever it might be. But then it's not shame free because about 10 minutes later, you do all of the shaming yourself, right? You
Hmm.
beat yourself
Hmm.
up, you're horrible to yourself. So the place that you get to on the other side of that can't be extreme control. It has to be normal, just peaceful, friendly, safe. That's the environment of just like, oh, I just eat well. That's just the thing I do, rather than
Hmm.
I have to count my calories. And if I go 1 calorie over or I accidentally eat too many carbohydrates, I'm the worst person ever. So I might as well eat pizza every day from now on, right? We don't want to trigger that cascade of thoughts by implementing some kind of deprivation, restriction, trigger on anybody.
So how does a person then do this? Like in the sense of if you've got a sugar addiction or you've got food addiction, which I think to some degree most people do at this
Yeah.
day and age with everything that's around us and the stress and the the blood sugar dysregulation. So sometimes it can be a physical, but sometimes it's emotional. Usually it's a little bit of both. How, like, what are we telling ourselves to help with these situations, right? I know every situation's different because it does depends on what you're stressed out about, but we
Mhm.
don't want to go into this going, okay, that's it. I'm going to quit eating sugar. I'm going to quit binge eating. I'm going to quit eating shitty foods. And this is what I'm going to do. Because
Mhm.
we know that this, we just talked about this, that typically doesn't work. We would just want to rebel against that. So,
Yeah.
what are we saying to ourselves? How do we set ourselves up for success?
The first thing is you have to want it. If I get on a call with anybody
Mm,
that's inquiring about the work that we do with people that says, I'm here because I should be getting healthy, or I'm here because my partner thinks I should lose weight, I instantly say, this isn't going to work. Because you actually have to want it. Now, there's also a scale of wanting it, right? There's like, it'd be nice to be healthy, versus I absolutely need to change or I'm going to die because I'm diabetic and overweight. And so I think anywhere on that scale is fine, but there has to be a part of you that wants to be different. And then I guess you need to understand how you get your validation, because someone who is socially driven needs to be in a community or a group environment that will help them move forward, right? Because a lot
mm,
of people try and do this. This is the reason that you could listen to all of Karen's podcasts, all of my podcasts, and you still won't change, right?
hmm,
Because a lot of people try and do this personal development work in private. And
hmm.
the reason that it doesn't work is because on the tough days, no one's there to have your back. No one's there to point you in the right direction when you're lost, when the book that you're reading doesn't have the specific answer for the problem today, right? And so when you do it in private, there's very few people that can make it last long term. And there's plenty that do, but it's difficult because if the way that you get validated is social or community driven or from your husband or your kids or your friends, and you're not telling them about anything that you're doing, then you're never going to get the feedback you need to be encouraged to take the next step, or that the step you have taken is worthy of acknowledgement and validation. Because humans need such a tiny amount of acknowledgement to be able to actually feel good about themselves. Like just
Hmm.
being noticed for your effort is huge. And anyone that's in a busy
Huge.
family probably knows it's like, you never get acknowledged for all the work you do. And then the one time it happens, you're like, oh my God, thank you for noticing.
Yeah,
Right?
totally.
Right? And
Yeah,
so it's the
yeah.
it's the same with our personal development journeys, which is why communities are so important, particularly for women. I would say men as well. We just have to go about it with men slightly differently in general. But it's this, you got to know how you get your validation, because otherwise, the tiny baby steps that you take in the beginning, which feel uninspiring, which feel uninteresting, which feel like you went from 0 to 1, and 1 is the beginning of going to 1,000. You're like, this is nothing.
Yeah.
But you need those tiny baby steps to be supported and validated and encouraged so that you can get to 10, 20, 100, 500. So I think that's a really important part, because doing it in private
Hmm.
because we're ashamed of what's going on, or because we're ashamed that we might fail, is part of the failure self-sabotage cycle.
Yes, and we're so alone. Like it's gotten so bad because we're all behind our phones now. We're all in
Yeah.
these houses by ourselves and not in community. And we're getting more and more isolated. I know for myself, 100% that's happened in the last 10 years. I'm just more and more and more by myself, by myself, by myself. And I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I got to get out. I got to find community. And luckily, like you, I've got my podcast, I've got my groups, which thank goodness I have an online community.
Yeah, yeah, it can be very lonely. And I think you're right. You know, the social media and being behind our phones, it gives us the illusion of connection, but it's often
No.
substanceless connection. You
Hmm.
know, it's very short time span, lacks meaning. Or the other is true that we go on these psychological roller coasters between stories or shorts on a social media platform. It's like I cry in this 15 seconds, and then in the next 30 seconds, I'm laughing. And then in the next 15 seconds, I watched another video where I was crying again. And that cycle every day, it wears you out emotionally. You know, it adds to your stress. If you're upset or you're emotionally moved by something, every 30 seconds, you wear out over the day. Your nervous system wears out, and you're then more likely to emotionally eat, binge eat. And that's why actually a part of what I do is often encouraging people to have a healthier relationship with social media and their phone, and introducing app blockers and things like that, because fundamentally everything we're talking about is about our neurotransmitters, right? Our
Hmm.
pursuit of serotonin and dopamine, and our wrestle with cortisol and adrenaline, so that, and figuring out that balance. Because whether it be food, drugs, porn, social media, whatever, it's the pursuit of short-term pleasure.
Hmm. Hmm. And they get so dulled, those receptors, the dopamine receptors, that you need more and more. I just listened to that woman that wrote that book, the Dopamine Nation.
Analembic.
Oh, so I was just like listening the whole time, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to get my kids off social media. I've got to get off social. But I know for myself, I never feel good after going through social media. Like if I'm scrolling, which everybody, yes, please go to my Instagram and follow me, but and Maddie too. We want you to just look at our stuff, nothing else.
Obviously.
No. But I never feel good, Maddie. And I will catch myself. I'll be like a 20-minute in on scrolling through Instagram and be like, I feel horrible now because
Yeah,
something will make me feel not worthy, or oh, look at that person, look at how well they're doing, or look at how her body. And even it's all like kind of subconscious going in there. It's not like I'm going, oh, I wish I looked like that or anything like that. It's just you go away feeling less than, and you're just like, oh, now I actually follow all these comedians. And so I purposely now in my feed, I get tons of little short clips of comedy shows. And that is where I'm
I love
safe.
that.
That's where I'm safe. And I try not to go anywhere else now because it makes me feel horrible. And so I'm like, no, no more. I can't do it.
Well, when anybody joins my program, the very first task that I ask them to do, and I make it a little competition, they have to spend 15 minutes to half an hour going through their email and their social media, unsubscribing and unfollowing all of the other people that make them feel less than in any way. And
Wow.
so we've had people that have put up like thousands of unfollows, and like all the way from about, oh, I got rid of 10 people, or I deleted these health apps off my phone. Because one of the big issues is that I find as well is that because the people we work with are following thousands of health experts, or they're subscribed to 5 different apps, they're getting so much misinformation, or not misinformation, but they're getting so much crossover and
Yeah.
contradiction of information.
Yeah.
And so I say, look, this is only going to work if we do just this. And
Yeah.
the only way we'll know if it's not working is if we do just this, right?
Yeah.
So it's difficult to guide people when there's like, oh, yeah, Maddie, I followed your advice for 5 weeks, and then I read this on Instagram, and then I did this for another 5 weeks, but I didn't tell you. And I'm like, well, I can't work with that because I didn't know, right? So I'm like, day one is about clearing out all of the confusion from your
Wow.
nutrition advice, clearing out all the confusion from your emotional chaos that gets created from social media, so that whether it's just comedians and family that you have on social media, but the idea is that you're just creating less mental load that goes into sitting on these apps every day and making you feel sad and happy. I mean, I'm starting, the journey to fatherhood. The amount of baby videos in 30 seconds that make me want to cry that I see now. I literally, to my partner Yali, I said the other day, I threw my phone down. I'm like, I'm not looking at social media anymore. All of these baby videos want make me want to cry, and I need that energy. I can't afford to spend that energy.
That's really sweet, though.
It is sweet, but at the same time, if I've cried 10 times before mid, that's, not good for the energy output of that day.
And I actually just talked about this on a podcast episode that I did where I empathized with my listeners about the fact that they get so much crossover with information about their
Mhm.
hormones. Just, one practitioner saying one thing and then another one saying another, and they're like, who do we believe? What do we do here? And it can get super challenging in today's world trying to figure out who to follow, what to do.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
yeah, but I like so we're clearing out negative, we're setting ourselves up for success, which I think is super key, and going into this with a healthier mindset about the whole situation, which is you really want to do it. And I think too, really figuring out your why. I think a lot of
Mhm.
people will, like you said, they'll just be like, well, I should be getting healthier. I shouldn't eat this stuff. I should lose weight, and that's it's not enough. You have to have a strong enough why, and a lot of the time it's not around health. Do you notice that? Unless somebody has a health scare.
Yeah, well, I actually get people to find, I've got kind of what I call a funnel of motivation. And as people are doing their goal setting, I guide people to find layers of motivation or layers that drive them to change because so the lowest level of motivation is superficial, and it's like body image, right? It's how I look in the mirror, how I look on the beach, how I look in a bikini. And so, for me, I don't wear bikinis, but like, let's say abs. Getting abs is like my bottom level motivator. But some days I wake up and I couldn't care less about abs, right? So if the superficial is my only motivator, what happens every 3 to 5 days when I give no shits about superficiality, right? And the same for somebody who's in a bigger body, right? That some days you wake up and you're like, who cares if I'm fat? I enjoy chocolate and I'm not going to stop. So on those days, you need a deeper level of motivation. So I've got the base level is abs, then the second level is more emotional, psychological. So for me, I know that if I don't work out regularly, that my mental health begins to deteriorate, right? Which is really common for both men and women. If you're not physically moving your body, you can have negative mental health. So then on the days when I wake up early, the alarm goes off and it's like, oh, I couldn't care less about abs. I really don't care. I'm already in a long-term relationship. She has to love me, right? Then I'm like, hang on. Your mental health goes down the drain, and you've been there before multiple times in your life. So
Mhm.
then the motivation is to get to the gym so that I don't fall apart psychologically. Which takes time, but you don't notice it happening until you're already there, right?
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where it's like, oh, I'll just miss today and I'll just miss tomorrow. And then in, 3 months, you're like, why is life so dark
Yeah.
at the moment? So you've got to be accountable. And then some days I don't care about my mental health either, right? So I've got to go to a bigger level of sort of motivation, which is more of an identity piece for me, which is, oh, I'm the guy that runs the How to Not Get Sick and Die podcast. I can't be fat, sick, and dying, right? And so it's more this leadership thing. And now that I've got, a kid on the way, it's also, I want that my child to look up and be like, Dad is fit and strong, especially if
Yeah.
it's a girl.
Yeah.
So that that I'm able to protect, and I'm able to just be fit and look after myself and keep up with all of the responsibilities. So I think having multiple layers of motivation and identifying them are important because you don't feel motivated by all of them every single day, whether it be the abs or whether it be the being a great father. Some days you don't care. So you need to have a layer of that motivational hierarchy that you can latch onto on any given day, no matter your mindset, no matter your sleep, no matter where you're at.
Mm, mhm, mhm. And do you do with your clients and stuff, do you also have them go, if these things don't happen, or if you don't get the abs, if you don't get the healthy body to be the father, or if you don't, get better so that you can get rid of whatever illness or chronic illness that you might have, what is going to happen? Like, do you
Yeah,
get them to kind of scare themselves a little bit? I used to do that with some of my clients where I'd be like, well, what if you don't do this? What's the long-term
yeah,
outcome?
completely. It
Like,
can be
worst
really
case
scary.
scenario.
And a lot of people have that example in their parents. That's often why they're doing this
Hmm.
work. They are seeing their parents deteriorate over, a 30-year period of slowly dying, sort
Hmm.
of getting all of the medications and ending up, seated most of the time. And it takes so long, and that's why my own parents are really inspiring. They've really turned their lives around and gotten really active and fit and strong since, the years that my sister and I lived at home, which is, fantastic. But it can be really sad to, yeah, watch your parents deteriorate. I know my grandmother, I've watched her deteriorate over 30 years with that sort of mainstream medical model of, everything's fine, just take more pills, and so, she's got dementia and Alzheimer's and stuff now, and that's happened really slowly over like 30 years. But yeah, I think, people being aware of where they could end up, I don't think there's any shortage of that, because you just have to walk outside to see how sick everybody is and overweight everybody is. But understanding that that could happen to you, because a lot of people use the escape mechanism of, oh, I'm different. It won't happen to me,
Yeah, yeah. I,
right?
I think most people don't go down that road and they kind of block it. It's like, well, that's not going to happen to me. I'm not going to die of cancer
Completely.
or, you know, I saw a woman yesterday actually in the grocery store and she was, walking. She was probably in her 80s and she was super slow. She was overweight. You could tell she was really unhealthy in her skin. And I was like, I can't become that. I can't. And I know I
Yeah.
won't, but that is typically where people end up. And it's like, I don't want to feel like that. Like how that woman looked, like how she felt. I was like, I don't ever want to feel that terrible. That to me
Oh,
is like the
totally.
worst.
Yeah, I feel the same. And I think if you've got an example in your family of what could happen, look in your family is probably a good place to start, actually, because instead of you getting to the same point before you realize, oh, it's happening to me right now, look at, the habits and the cycles that your family has been on, because they often say it's not genetics that run in family that is the problem. It's the habits, it's the recipes,
Mm.
it's the lifestyle decisions. They're the things that run in families that are handed down from parent to child that we then go and repeat, that the modern world every year has made more accessible, cheaper, and more toxic for us. They're the things that we sort of get on and consume and follow, which makes sense because our parents are meant to show us how to do life and how to do the world, and we learn those skills. But also, those skills were driven by industry that was trying to make lots of money fast, and is
Yeah.
still doing that, whether it be the chocolate industry or the grain industry or the social media industry. And those are now, we know, really destructive, because of the volume of which they're available and the convenience at which they're available. So I think this kind of ties back to, once you identify what is possibly going to go wrong for you in a realistic way by looking at your family or your friends that you associate with, and what's going on with their health issues, it's then going back to that community. It's like, I need to attach myself to someone or some group of people somewhere that are just a step ahead of me. Maybe not
Yes.
too far ahead of me, but just a couple of steps in front, that are going to support me and celebrate me when I make positive progress, that are going to hold me accountable, that are going to help me get up when I fall over. Because there's a lot of
Hmm.
programs and
Hmm.
communities out there where if you fall over, shame is the response. Weight
Oh,
Watchers is very famous for how they humiliate people when they don't
oh,
weigh in positively. They had a song. There's a song on YouTube. You can find it. The Weight Watchers song in the 90s that they would sing to the people in the like they were physical meetups in the 90s. Yeah, that basically just shamed them for not losing weight.
oh.
Like in this really humiliating way. So you don't want to be in a community like that. You want to be in a community where it's like, I like to think about it as they're firm but understanding and compassionate, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And then it's also finding people around you and finding that community that is like-minded, that support that, right? Support
Yeah.
health. If you're wanting to quit drinking, but yet you're hanging out with people that just get shit-faced every single weekend, guess what? It's
Yeah,
going to be really hard for you to get out of that because that's who
completely.
you've surrounded yourself with. And they say you are who you surround yourself with. And so finding the health community, we were just talking about this before we aired. And I was just saying, like, I'm feeling lonely these days because I don't
Yeah.
have a lot of people around me to talk about health and to talk about emotional eating and all these things that I can talk about for hours. There's nobody that, like, my kids don't want to talk about it. My husband doesn't care to talk about it very much. So it's like if I'm not doing these podcasts and hanging out with you guys online, I don't have anybody. And so I was saying I want to go to this conference just because I need that fix of being around community of a community of like-minded people. And I think that that's really huge. And I think it's something that we have to purposely create, because if we don't, we just push it to the side. Because especially, I don't know if men are the same way, but women, I think because we're so like, I don't need help and I can do this all on my own. And, like we're just go, go, go. And I think it's hard for us to take that time for ourselves and be like, you know what? I need to do this for me, not for my family, not for, for the betterment of my children. I just need to go and do this for mom, for me. I need to go and hang out in Las Vegas with my friends. And it's not a party, it's a health conference, just so everybody knows. I'm not going to Vegas to what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas. Although I was just telling you that we may go to Thunder Down Under, which is a male strip show, but shh, everybody, don't tell anyone.
Got to treat
I don't
yourself.
drink. But yeah, you
But
know what I mean? Like, I think we have to purposely do this.
yeah, and I think one of the reasons that people fall off the bandwagon for permanently or never try is because as humans we are pack animals and everybody thinks they can do it on their own, forgetting that we're an animal that is, just like a lion, we need a pride, right? And
Yeah.
so when you try something in a community of people that are sick and unhealthy and uninterested in progressing, your sense of belonging is challenged because you start to no longer feel like you belong to this family or to this group of friends. But if you can't then identify with belonging to a new group, you will give up and quit because you feel threatened. You're like, I'll be out in the wild on my own. I'll be judged at family events. People will comment, if I don't drink, they harass me, whatever it is. It's that fundamental sense of belonging that makes us feel safe as humans and like our survival. We're not going to die. Basically, it goes down to a root cause of death, of the fear of death. And if we have to consciously, like you said, curate that group of people or choose each step of the way who we're going to spend time with, because if we don't have that sense of belonging at home or in our community where we live, then we're just going to regress. We're going to keep going back and back and back. And that's why they say your postcode or your zip code is more powerful than your genetic code. And there's studies that prove that. Anyone that's done
Wow.
a health degree studied a thing called the social determinants of health. And that's because your sense of belonging influences the decisions you make about food and lifestyle, which then impact your genetic code. So the food and lifestyle comes first, which is why
Right.
where you live, the family you're in, the friends you keep will dictate your health outcomes far more than just your daily desire to be better, because that it comes back to that sense of belonging.
Wow. That's cool. Let's talk about trauma for a second.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you something about you
Yeah. Okay. Oh,
that you've,
maybe this
no,
will be traumatic.
no, no, it's not traumatic. It was a gift that you gave me that was so great, about trauma. And so for years and years and years and years, like a decade, I have always been trying to figure out my traumas and, am I not dealing, have I not dealt with something that I need to be dealing with? And I went through years and years and years of all different types of therapy. I've done all this. I've read every freaking self-help book under the sun. Like, I have
Mhm.
really put the time in to deal with childhood and teenage traumas and adulthood traumas. And I've had a lot for sure. Um, and about 15 years ago, I started getting chronic migraines. And I spent the next 15 years, or a little less than that, trying to figure out the emotional root cause, because I'm very big into there's usually an emotional root cause to chronic pain that's not going
Yeah.
away. Like if you haven't been able to figure it out, it's typically something traumatic, is what I had always been told and what I believed. And so I was constantly trying to figure this out, beating myself up for it, thinking, okay, well, what do I need to do next? Like maybe I do somatic therapy, and maybe I do this, maybe I do that. And I was constantly putting pressure and stress on myself about it. And I came to this like realization one day, or just, I don't even know if it was a realization, but just this thought that came into my head of, what if it's not about trauma? What if, yeah, like some people's is based from trauma for sure. But what if a lot of it isn't? And what if it's just that we're in a human body and human bodies fricking break down? Like that's what we do. We get sick, we start to get old, we start dying, we start, like this is just human. And you and I were talking one day, just the two of us, and I asked you, I was like, what do you think? Like, do you think that it's always trauma based, and that, all this, like I said, everybody, this is what you see, everything on social media is about the traumas that you haven't dealt with, and the emotional repression. And you were like, basically like, yeah, F that, Karen. Like, no, it is this. It can just be, this is just you. It's your human. It doesn't have to be that there was trauma. And you just like, you gave it to me straight up. And I was so great. And I'm telling you, Maddie, this was like probably 2 years ago. That resonated with me more than anything else. And I ran with it. And I was just like, from that day forward, I was like, no, it's not. I'm not gonna, it's not gonna be a trauma that I haven't dealt with. This is just my genetics. I'm susceptible to migraines, period. End of story. I'm gonna take this medication that gets rid of my migraines most of the time for the rest of my life if I have to. And I am moving forward. I ain't gonna dwell on this any longer. And it just was this huge relief of pressure off of myself. And now I see other people now, and I'm recognizing where I'm just like, it's not all trauma. It's not all trauma. This is just you're human too. This, yes,
Yeah.
it can be, but it can also be that you're just human. And this is the way we are built or hardwired, or our genetics.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for
That was
sharing
a
that. I'm
long
glad that
story.
was
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm glad that was impactful. But I think as well, like even thinking about your migraines, going away from the emotional stuff and just thinking practically, how unnatural is it that you spend 10 to 16 hours a day in front of a computer, right? With your eyes staring at the screen.
Right?
Yeah, like there's so much that we do that is not what our biology was designed for. Yes, we've been able to adapt to it. We can sit in front of computers all day for many years, but it's not the premium expression of our biology, right? Which should be out there hunting, gathering, moving, stretching, and so as a result, there's physical consequences. And I think there's two sides to it. One, the life we live now is not physically optimal for our biology, and so there are physical consequences, and that's the exact reason there's still health and nutrition advice in my emotional binge and overeating programs, because sometimes the diet's not right. Sometimes
Yeah.
what you're doing doesn't work for you, and we've got to figure that out. But the other side of it is the psychological component of being lost or believing that you are forever broken, right? And which is just
Mhm.
as burdensome as being broken, because you can
Mhm.
spend forever being like, what's the root cause? What was happened to me? Maybe I've got a memory that, yeah, I haven't released of some
Yes.
kind of
That's what I
horrific
was
thing that
doing.
happened. And sure, it's a good idea to spend a little bit of time there and explore your psychology and figure out that. But if you're on that too long, then you have an identity of feeling incomplete, right? And being unable to find or resolve the parts of you that are wrong, which is an inherent judgment that you are wrong, right? You are not right. You are not
Mhm.
complete. You are not
Mhm.
whole. And that narrative can be just as destructive, because then you go and emotionally eat, engage in all of the dopamine seeking behaviors with the belief that there's something wrong with me and I just don't know what it is, right?
Mhm.
And that's just as unhelpful as knowing what's wrong with you, it shows up as an excuse or a reason to be able to exercise these parts of you which are not serving your higher self and not moving you towards positive outcome. And you can have stages of your healing journey where you're just not in it. You're just like, yeah,
Mhm.
maybe there's some stuff that needs to be fixed. That's not where my energy's going right now. I'm mostly okay with how I live my life. life. There's a few things that need attention, and that's a very different energy to I'm broken and I don't know why,
Yeah.
and being
Yeah.
stuck there.
Yeah. And being almost addicted to that place, in being in that place of constantly being broken. That, and we see this with clients. I know you do, I do, where you
Yeah.
see people starting to get better and then they self-sabotage in some
Yeah.
way, shape, or form, and because they need to bring themselves back to being broken.
Yeah, yeah, the familiarity. It's like the devil I know is better than the devil that I don't. And
Hmm.
you could even sort of go down to the nervous system level. A lot of people have lived, stressed, anxious, alert lives, and so their nervous system is so wired to be alert, especially mums. They're always go, 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 go. That as soon as the kids move out, or they get to an age where you've got a bit of space, you still are super busy all of the time. You find a way to fill every single void of time because your nervous system, the second it starts to go down and calm itself a little bit, and there's a little bit less cortisol and adrenaline, your body's like, this is a bit strange. This feels dangerous. This feels unfamiliar,
Yeah.
right? And so you're like, quick, get back into busyness, right? And then we get, and this is your world, we get women that enter menopause in a really horrific way because
Hmm.
they've just spent so much of their life wired,
Hmm.
and on edge and filling all of the gaps with food or distraction or busyness or helping the kids or whatever it is. And sometimes you got to go through chapters of life where that's the case. But it's this idea of nervous system activation. And, a lot of our healing, I believe, emotionally and psychologically and physically will be when that nervous system has the capacity to calm down and actually shift into healing, which is really hard to get to if we're always activated and wired. Easier said than done, obviously, but on a fundamental biological level, it's not even necessarily woo-woo esoteric feeling stuff. It's like just your nervous system's on all of the time.
Hmm. And I think in menopausal women, it's like the harder the symptoms are and the worse time they're having are the women. It just seems to be not everybody, but I see this pattern where
Hmm.
it's these women that aren't taking care of themselves. And it's like their body starts to scream louder and louder, like, hey, you're still not paying attention to me? Okay,
Yeah.
we're going to turn this up. And okay, now you're going to have like hot flashes all the time, or you're going to gain weight, or you're going to do this, you're going to do that. And it's these women, they're just like, they're trying to outrun it and go, 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 and trying to exercise their way out of it. And it's just like, actually, this is the time where your body's trying to tell you, pay attention to me. You got to
Yeah.
pay attention to me during this time. You got to baby me. You got to like comfort me. You got to give yourself the massage and the time out and the time with friends. And it's your time now. And so take
Yeah.
it and take care of yourself. And so I do see that. I do see that happening. But I just think, it's just not always trauma. And sometimes it's just like my sister has a sugar addiction and she's done all the work as well and dealt
Hmm.
with traumas and counseling, and
Yeah.
she just tells me that she's like, you know what? I think about that all the time. Like maybe it's something that I haven't dealt with, but then she's like, but I really think that at this point in the game, a lot of it is just pure physical sugar addiction and boredom
Mm.
that
Yeah,
drives her to
which
eat.
Yeah, and I would say the boredom thing is actually the nervous system activation because we're not comfortable sitting in calm peacefulness, right? We're doing
Mm,
nothing. We always are seeking stimulation.
yeah.
And that's why, yoga, meditation, breath work, are good practices to begin lowering the nervous system. And the reason I like breath work
Hmm.
and yoga is because it's an active form of calming the nervous system.
Same.
You're still using the nervous system a little bit because a
Yep.
lot of people go straight to meditation and then say, I can't meditate, it's too hard.
Yeah.
And so I think like doing active meditation is like semi-stimulated nervous system, and that's
Yep.
like it's a happy medium for
Yes.
people to practice. And sometimes that's where you'll stay and you'll never be a meditator, right? But that's still better than always activated.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I think boredom eating is more of that, that but pleasure seeking behavior, escape the calm, the quiet type stuff also there's a nutritional component to that for many people too. They realize, oh, I don't boredom eat as much when I get enough protein, right? Or I don't have the same sugar cravings when I get the right amount of protein and fat in each meal. Or I've rebuilt my microbiome. So there's also, again, the physical component. It's not always deep psychology stuff and you're all broken and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. And so moving now, just to now let's just take it. We didn't kind of finish the step the 5-step plan here or whatever it is. Which I don't want to give you we don't want to give all your tricks of the trade away. You know, I want people to come get your help in your program, I think, because your program's so incredible.
Thank you.
But yeah, just some tips for how do we start to manage this? How can we, what are some healthy things that we can do that isn't putting these massive restrictions around ourselves and saying, I'm going to go on a diet, I'm going to quit sugar, I'm going to, and then just rebelling.
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's obviously a little bit of a journey.
Mm,
And the stage one is simply observation. Because a lot of people dive into any kind of change and they try to change it without becoming literate in the problem
mm,
and understanding the problem. So the first step is simply what are my cycles? Because a lot of people can sort of say them, but not in intimate detail. And what I mean by that is, when a situation occurs that makes you feel activated or triggered or pissed off or angry or sad, what was the thing that triggered that? What are a list of things that trigger that? Where do you then go physically? Do you go to the pantry? Do you go to the fridge? Is it always in the car? What's the location that it happens? What is the food? And what is the emotional payoff? Like, how do you feel after, like, seconds after eating the food? Is there a sigh of relief? Is the goal just to sort of numb out completely? And so you want to know what's going on in all of those parts so that you can understand yourself. That's like step
right.
one, is just understanding who I am and why I do what I do. And some
Mhm.
people would argue that degree of awareness, it can be problematic for some people because then they obsess about the details or find even more excuses to behave however they would like to behave.
Mhm.
But I think it's really important because only when you know the parts of that system intimately are you then able to replace or deconstruct in a helpful way. Because I'm not saying that you should never seek the dopamine payoff, right? Because a lot of people start a new diet or a strategy and they're like, oh, just never do that again. I'll be never pissed off again. And it doesn't work because your body is a nervous system is so used to seeking that outcome that it still wants it. And so what we need to do as the next step is figure out what are a list of slightly healthier or really healthy alternatives that produce the same emotional payoff. So it's not
Mm,
no chocolate. It might be a step from terrible chocolate to 80%, cacao chocolate, right? Or it might be a step from there to doing, the next stage would be let's replace it with 10 squats. Let's produce a dopamine response out of some of 10 movements, physical movements, 10 push-ups, whatever. Walk around the block or walk around the house, dance for 30 seconds. Because we're still producing dopamine in that scenario and serotonin, right? And endorphins, especially if we're doing physical movement. So there's still an emotional payoff. We don't want to deny ourselves that emotional payoff. That's step one. Step
mhm.
two is then I guess once you understand that, once you've got some alternatives, it is actually dealing with the underlying problem, right? Because even though I'm saying that there's healthier ways you can deal with it, you're still not dealing with it. It's still a healthy form of escapism, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you need to do that because you can't just cry at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday in a meeting, right? So sometimes you actually need to escape in a healthy way. It's like, oh, the kids are here now. I can't express my emotion the way I need to. I've got to be strong. That's okay. We all have to do that a lot of the time. But if you never release it, it just adds to the pile of problems within you psychologically and emotionally. So you then have to allocate time to go and journal, to speak to a psychologist, to catch up with a friend, to vent, to fix the problem, sit down and have a difficult conversation. Because if
Mhm.
you never actually get to the fix the problem stage, you're forever going to be on the hamster wheel of suppression and escapism, no matter how healthy your escapism strategy is, which is great. You've made a positive progress. You're still not dealing with the fundamental issue that you're escaping from. So,
Mhm.
and that's the most difficult step because it's usually hard conversations. Sometimes it's relationship ending stuff. Sometimes it's quitting a job. Sometimes it's moving house. Sometimes it's not. as big as that stuff, but sometimes it is.
Mhm.
And some people willingly stay in their escapism cycle because they're like, yep, never having that conversation with my mother, or never having that conversation with my husband. So I'm just going to try and use my grit and willpower to be healthier in the way that I escape things, which is what
Yep.
most people try and do with
That's what most
diets.
people do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be healthier in the way we escape, which is fine, but it's only fine if you then fix the problem.
Yes. Yes. And that's where so many of us go wrong.
Yeah, totally.
And why
So,
we
but
fail.
yeah, and most diets and programs for physical health, haven't involved psychological support or understanding because we just didn't understand it. At least from a Western medical research perspective, I would argue that many long histories in different cultures have understood the psychology and emotions much better than we do, using Western medical thinking. But yeah, like all of the nutrition programs and the workout programs that have been around for the last 100 years haven't involved psychology or mindset. So it's nobody's fault that they don't know this or don't understand it or feel a default to be like, no, I just need a nutrition solution or a pill or a supplement. That's the way we've been programmed. And
Yeah.
it's a shortcut. The brain wants a shortcut.
Yep.
But unfortunately, as everybody knows, that shortcut doesn't lead very far.
No, and if you've been doing that over and over and over again your whole life, which most people have, most women
Yeah.
have. Like
Yeah.
I think it's 80% of all women or something aren't happy with their bodies and 95% of all diets fail. So it's like, but yet that's what we keep looking for. We're looking for the supplement, we're looking for the workout plan, the diet, something that is going to fix the eating behavior. And it's always temporary. And so you have to dig deeper and really figure it out because maybe it's not trauma like we've said
Yeah.
here today. It may not be some deep-seated shit that you got to deal with because a lot of people like they resist that. They do. They're like,
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to deal with that. That's too much work.
Yeah.
And I know I had trauma. That's what I used to say to myself. I know I had trauma. So because I knew that I had trauma, I thought that that was enough.
Yeah.
That there
Totally.
was a lot of shit that I had to deal with. So I did have to deal with a lot of stuff. Maybe not anything that was leading to migraines, which is fine. I know now, but but if even if it's not trauma and it's just boredom, well then fix the boredom. That's the root, then
Yeah.
go out there and do something. Don't just keep trying to quit sugar. If you're going to sugar because you're bored and you want that dopamine hit and you're addicted to it, well then get a hobby for heaven's sakes,
Yes. A
Go
healthy form of
dance.
rebellion.
A healthy form of rebellion. Let's bring this full circle. I love it. I love it. But you hear about that like when people I remember actually learning that in nutrition school when it was the emotional psychology of eating modules. And they told some story and it never left my head. And it was that this woman who had like could not lose weight, had all this food addiction, and she started to get into horses because that was something that she'd always wanted to do. And she started riding horses and realized whenever she was in the moment and she was with these horses during the day, she never thought about food. And every
Mm,
other time she always thought about food. And it was just simply she needed to be doing something, occupying her time with something that gave her pleasure,
yeah,
which
totally.
we really
Pleasure,
lack.
purpose, enjoyment. Yeah, and it comes going full circle. It's your inner child being expressed. That's that play. And there's
Yeah.
research studies which I've been looking at lately because I'm about to have a child, as I've mentioned.
Yeah.
But the more that kids play as kids, the more emotionally mature they tend to be in research studies as adults. And that's often we were told to grow up. Do your homework, do this, do this. Don't play, don't play, don't express your inner self, suppress your inner self. So then we realize 40 years later that the answer is expressing our inner child in pleasurable, fun environments from when we were suppressed as a kid.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think you're going to be an excellent father, just so you know. And so tell everybody where they can find you. And your program now, which I love, you used to have it like you used to do it in cohorts throughout the year, but you've changed
Mhm.
that. And so if you guys listen to our podcast from before, it is now something that you can kind of enter into at any time. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. But I also say this to everybody when I tell them that anyone that feels like they have forever never does anything.
Oh,
So,
true. That's so true. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's like
So,
it's always, if they know it's always there and always open, they're like, oh, well, another day. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. And everybody is
exactly.
closing on Tuesday, enrollment.
So yeah,
So
Mind
get
Body
in there.
Nourishment Program.
Hmm.
You can
It's just
find
for
me on my
women,
website.
correct?
I work with men, but one on one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. The self love moves into more self respect. It's a little bit of a different conversation. Um,
Geez. And I wish we would have talked about that too today.
yeah,
The
slightly
difference between
different.
self-respect over self-love, so women, it's more about self-love, and for men, it's more self-respect.
Yep, yep. And some women actually feel a bit weird about self love, even. So we start with self respect because it's a more masculine energy, which is, a whole rabbit hole here. But the feminist world has masculinized the modern woman. And so we have
Yep.
to start there before we move into emotions and love. And plenty of women have the same resistance to talking feelings as men do, right?
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, slightly different approach.
Oh, wow. Okay. But the group program people can enroll in,
Yep.
and this is what it's all about. It's a lot of this is like kind of figuring out some of the psychology behind some of the behavior around eating behaviors and getting rid of the whole dieting mentality and what else?
Yeah, yeah, exactly that. So, yeah, we sort of go through, start with goal setting, but deep dives on emotions, deep dives on the past, understanding of neurotransmitters and hormones in regards to how that drives our behavior and our habits. And I tell everybody this. It can be hard. It can be
Hmm.
emotional. It can be
Hmm.
intense, and bring up some stuff. But that's the reason that it works is that we go to the
Hmm.
root cause of the behavioral cycles or the self-sabotage cycles and begin healing those. And it can take a week, it can take 5 years, but at least we start basically. So yeah, and then once we do all of that sort of self-love, self-nurture, permission to prioritize yourself, that kind of stuff, then we move into the actual nutrition. There's gut health, there's a little bit on hormones, there's a little bit on blood sugar regulation, and then we go through all of the meals, all of the different ways you can eat, all of the different ways that feel good for you, and that's a little bit different for everybody. There's a bit of
Hmm.
intermittent fasting stuff in there, which, isn't, 18-hour fasts a day. It's just for some people, they feel good getting rid of dinner. Some people feel good getting rid of breakfast. Some people simply feel good having less snacks, which generally is a good thing for most people to aim for, depending on what their eating was before. So yeah, when I say fasting, it's not like hunger and starvation, because that's the biggest trigger for emotional eating is being hungry.
And so you're
so
really teaching them how to find what's going to work for them.
yeah, correct.
Yeah, no dieting dogma, which is really healthy.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And you've been doing this for several years. You do one-on-one and you do group. What is the advantage to doing the group? Because I think for a lot of people, they'll hear like, oh, I need to be vulnerable and and it could be emotional for me and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Typically people associate that with like one-on-one coaching where they're in the privacy of just you and them, and it's like they can feel like they can be safe to let go. But there's something to be said about group. I mean, I've had my group for 7 years, no, over 7 years, 8 years now my group's been going, and there's something to be said about even though it's online, the
Mhm.
healing can take place within a group setting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it goes back to that conversation around belonging to a community of people that validate you, that support you in the way that you want to be supported, and that understand the challenges and struggles that you've had as well, so that you feel
Mhm.
understood. A lot of the time on our calls, I've got lots of wonderful things that I can recite and say from my education and my life experience, but some of the most important wisdom is handed from one client to another.
Mm.
In the container that we've been able to create about this, this particular journey or this particular topic. And we have a thing that we call not the hot seat, but the soft seat on our
Ah.
calls. And that's the opportunity for someone to say, hey, I've got a difficult emotional thing I want to talk about, basically. So that's the way that people can nominate motivate themselves to say, "Oh, I want to work on something difficult." And in the beginning, it can feel a bit disconcerting being in a room of people that you don't know that are talking about heavy things, but it takes about 2 or 3 sessions of people talking about heavy things to be like, oh, I'm the same as everybody else. It's
Yep.
fine. Everyone else is comfortable talking. It's totally okay. So we make a very important or a very specific intention to make sure that it's a safe space and that people are not forgotten and are supported and are communicated with afterwards as well if they've, released something particular. And I always tell people as well, vulnerability hangovers are a real thing. And so if you have shared something or you have opened a wound or opened yourself up, that you should very consciously close yourself up again,
Mm.
because otherwise you're going to walk around with that wound open all day and everything will piss you off or upset you. So sort of
Wow.
dealing with that head on rather than carrying a vulnerability hangover for the next week is really important as well.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. Yeah, and it's very quick for people to realize that, oh, everybody here understands where I'm coming from, and everybody's empathetic, and everybody is here to support me
Yeah.
because they're there because they understand it. And so you go in like super afraid to kind of open up and talk about your issues and be vulnerable. But very quickly you're like, oh my gosh, I feel super supported because it's this group of women, number one, that are all like loving and caring, and you can hear it in just even in the community posts where they 100% you could see the support that everybody has for each other, even though they don't know each other, they can't see each other unless we're in a group call, but it's there and it's palpable. You can feel it. Yeah, it gives me
Yeah.
shivers actually thinking about it. Yeah,
Yeah,
just
it's a
how
beautiful
supportive it
thing.
is. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think there's something to be said about group therapy like that.
Oh, I completely agree. A lot of trauma therapy is done in group as well, and addiction therapy. And you could argue that the emotional binge eating stuff enters the space of addiction in many cases
Yeah,
for a lot of people.
yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's important. And we're running our first retreat next year, so that's exciting. So I can't wait to sit with these people in real
In
life.
person in
Some of them have been
Australia?
on our yeah, in Australia. Some of them have been on our Zoom calls for years, so I can't wait to do that.
Oh my gosh, I want to do that too with I've always said that. I'm like, it'd be so amazing to do one day. Oh, and how long is it going to be?
I think we're still planning. Yali's helping me plan it. That's kind
Yeah.
of what she's been helping with lately. It's probably going to be 4 days, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say that it should be 3 or 4 days. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, well, very exciting. Well, if it wasn't in Australia, I'd come, but maybe I could maybe just do a talk on hormones and come and be a practitioner.
Perfect. Let's do it.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, my friend, for coming on the show again and sharing your wisdom with all of my listeners. And I know that they're going to really appreciate it. So I look forward to your fourth or fifth time, whatever it is that we're at now. And it
Yeah.
won't, hopefully it won't be as long. I mean, like in between times, because it's been, well, me, you, and Marty did one. That was the
Yeah.
two-parter. That one was
Yep.
awesome. I'm going to link
We
to
should do
those, you
another
guys,
one.
in the show notes. We should. I haven't spoken to him since like then, years
Yeah.
ago.
Wow.
Do you still talk to him?
Yeah. We talk every few days.
No.
Yeah. All of
Oh
the
my God.
time.
Oh, well, I feel like I've got FOMO now. We should do one where we just get on. That was hilarious. I'm going to link to that one in the show notes, you guys, because it was the best. It was like a two-part. We laughed through the whole thing, I think, because we were having such a good time. Marty does a bunch of, does he still doing the same thing?
Yeah.
Uh, what did he call it? What was his program called?
Nutrient optimizer or
Yeah,
data-driven fasting.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Which was very successful. Yeah,
Yeah. He's doing
yeah.
very well.
Awesome. And he quit his job to do it, which is really
Yeah.
cool. Okay, right
Yeah.
on. Okay,
So cool.
well, we'll talk about that later. Okay, thank you, my friend.
Thanks for having me.